our scholarships. Monetary scholarships are available for seniors. For underclassmen, we have scholarships available for, like I said, NC State's Design Camp and NC State's Engineering Camp. So in regards to scholarships, the things we're looking for are one of the most important things will be your application. So included in that application, which you'll be able to access through your student profile on ACE, are just some basic information and then essay questions. So we'll be looking at those essay questions. We'll also be looking at your participation in the group. So if you've been attending sessions, if you've been participating in sessions, whether that's asking in these large group lessons, if you've been asking questions, participating in chat, in your small group sessions, if you've been, actively engaged in talking with your mentors, as well as submitting all of these activities that we've been putting together. So take that into consideration, as we do continue to move through, be active if you are interested in applying for a scholarship. Reminder too, we're keeping everything going in Google Classroom. So go ahead and post your activities in there to get some mentor feedback. Next week, we do have a small group session scheduled. So if you have some time and you'd like to go back and maybe rework some of the things you've already posted, like your floor plan layout or that site plan layout we worked on, go ahead and do that. And, I've always said to my group, I think one of the easiest ways to kind of think about the design of your project is to post images. So like I said, that's what today's assignment will be, really heavy on images. But if there's any others that you want to update, go ahead and do that. And we'll be talking about them with your small group. And finally, the schedule. So as you can see, like I said, we're pretty far along here in our schedule. Next week, we have a small group session, then we'll take a break for the holidays. We're going to come back in January and start off with a virtual site tour given by Barnhill Construction. And then we're really spending this, the first part of ACE, we've spent really thinking about the design. So when you think about architecture, landscape architecture, interior design, some of the technology behind it, then we'll start to get more into the engineering and construction sides of the field once we move into January. So for those of you interested in engineering construction, don't worry, we're getting there. We'll get to that good stuff. So that's all coming after our holiday break. So I'm going to go ahead and ask if there are any questions. Obviously, I know y'all are good about posting things in the chat. And then Philippe, any introduction needed for the video lesson?
No, we kind of introduced ourselves in there, but we're LS3P. I think in this call we have a couple of people from there, both architecture and interior design. And it should be good to go.
Okay, great. Well, let me go ahead and get that started.
Hi, welcome to ACE. We are with LS3P Associates, an architecture, interior, and urban planning design firm in our Raleigh location. Today, we're going to talk about the interior design aspect of the building design process. First, we'll go through where interior design fits within the project design team.
Interior designers work in tandem with the architect to bring the owner's ideas into physical form. Not only do we design with the architect, but also maintain communication lines with the engineers, the general contractors, and the owner. This web of collaboration allows us to coordinate different design features such as space layouts with the architect, lighting and plumbing fixtures with the engineers, or questions and conflicts from the general contractor. What does interior design entail?
Hi, I'm Aria Real, and I'm an interior designer at LS3P in Raleigh, North Carolina.
So how would you explain interior design?
Interior design is the practice of enhancing a building's interior for not only an aesthetically pleasing atmosphere, but the health, safety, and welfare of the building's users.
As an interior designer, what do you do?
You might be familiar with the concept of interior design from shows on networks like HGTV. And while these are entertaining shows and they cover a lot of aspects of interior design, there's so much more to the craft. Interior design for a single family home, educational facility, entertainment complex, or even a hospital. All interior designers have the responsibility of creating efficient space, designing for the space's intended use, and minding the overall experience of the building's users. So what are the prerequisites of being a certified interior designer or working in a typical design firm? The first step is a formal education at a college with an accredited 2 or 4+ year interior design program. There are two options from there. Either go into the design field with just your college education or pursue further certification through the NCIDQ exam. The benefits of certification can vary from an elevated title within a firm, higher salary, or simply the confidence of your company and clients. Additionally, you may consider whether you would like to join a professional organization. Each one has its own purpose and ideals. Find the right one for you, and perhaps join even as a student for added support in your career path. We know what interior design generally is and how to join a career path for it. Now let's go through the typical process of an interior design project.
So the design process starts with evaluating the shell space and looking at geometry to figure out how we can create interesting spaces within the shell. So we meet with the client and we discuss what their goals are, what their program needs are, and we create a program for them. We find out that they need certain types of spaces and quantities, and then we make a list from that. And then we discuss what their design intent is, what kind of style they have. Are they looking for industrial? Are they looking to have traditional or transitional or even resimercial?
So what tools do you typically use to aid you in the design process?
Well, I typically start with sketching, so pen and paper, pencil and paper, and start sketching out geometry. From there, I start looking on Pinterest and online to find inspirational images to help the design further along. And then we bring it into Revit and start modeling stuff to create the geometry to show the client their images with finishes inside of those spaces. And we show them by putting it into a PowerPoint presentation or some sort of presentation to deliver to the client.
During the design process, we use a combination of hand and digital skills to create sketches and computer models. These help bring the client's goals into three-dimensional ideas. We then take those images and apply touches of realism to them by adding textures and materials, allowing us to closely mimic the experience that the space will create. How do we communicate these ideas into buildable documents? We use the set of drawings as an instructions on how to make the client's goals into a reality. Just like an architectural set, the interior design uses similar types of drawings to convey how the space is built. This is an example of a finished plan, which shows different materials and patterns that the floors will have. We then match the drawings to a finish schedule or chart that explains what each material is, its product name, manufacturer, color, and sizes. For this project, the owner wanted a resimercial feel. We incorporated a lounge area, a meeting area, a work area, all in this lobby of this commercial office building. The concept for the floor pattern came from the ceilings. We wanted to mimic the shape of the ceiling with a combination of large format tiles and metal strips to create the outlines as seen in the ceiling. The overall purpose of the design was to create pockets of space where people can sit down and linger in a lobby setting. We use elevations, which are two-dimensional representations, in the same way as plans. They show the patterns and materials in the walls, as well as the extent of the accent areas and changes in material. To me, it's all about the details. How is something made? We also use more zoomed-in drawings, which we call details, to show how exactly each different material comes together, how construction materials are assembled. To create more interest along the lobby walls, we integrated niches for sculptures. The shape and the layout of these niches also align with the elevator doors across the lobby. Lastly, we create finish boards. These are an assembly of small samples of the final materials chosen and help us to see different materials look together, both visually and how they interact with each other. We can see how carpets look with tiles and how the wall paint looks next to the wood, and so on. In this lobby project, we use different wall coverings to highlight specific areas in the lobby, like lounges and sculpture niches. Finish boards can also be made to describe specific rooms. This one shows a combination of materials used in the lobby bathroom. As mentioned before, we make these finish boards from small cutouts of samples of materials that are provided by the manufacturers. Lately, a lot of finish boards are made digitally with images of material and textures used for the boards, but we also sometimes find it more effective to make physical finish boards to see, touch, and feel the materials in person, giving us a better sense of the relationship between the materials of the finished space. We get all of these samples from our finish library. This is a bank of materials for selection, and it is organized by material type and then alphabetically for ease of finding products. These are materials for flooring, cork, wood veneers, to paint and colors, glass, and wall coverings. As interior designer, we are tasked with selecting the furniture that will be in a space. These products are constantly changing and evolving, not to mention the size of the furniture. So we simply keep a digital catalog of these items.
Once we have most of the materials picked out, we can start to apply them digitally to our project to see how the space would look like before any construction begins. We use softwares like Enscape, Lumion, and Twinmotion, which can quickly produce renderings and allow us to show the owner a realistic representation of the space with our selected materials. Here are some examples of the lobby we were looking at before, from a digital rendering of the space compared with the photo taken after construction. We can see that the end product is very similar to the early representation. And these last few images are a little bonus. This is an office building for a tech client, which we worked on in partnership with another interior designer. It shows the process of how our drawings on paper are a guide for the contractor to bring the design created from the interior designer, architect, and owner into a finished product. And in this side, we can see hangout and break rooms on different floors of the same building. We can see how the space with similar layouts can feel drastically different by the materiality of the space, the floors, walls, ceilings, lighting fixtures, and furniture. They all created a unique experience dependent on the concepts intended by the interior design. So now for our activity. We'll be making a digital finish board for our project. We will use precedent images, so great if you already have them, and also pick many of the colors and materials for both the interior and exterior of the project. The file that we have is already set up to work in PowerPoint. It loses the automatic image insert feature if not open on PowerPoint, but if you don't have PowerPoint, don't worry, send us a message and we can figure out an alternative. So the first thing that we do is we need to collect images into 3 separate folders. One for inspiration and precedent images, one for interior finishes, and a third one for exterior finishes. So once we have all those, we can open up the PowerPoint. It'll look something like this. In each of these little labels, you'll just click on the image and search for the image in your folder that you've already saved and start filling them out. And then by the end, you'll have a complete finish board for all the interior and exterior. So look for any textures, paints, materials, hardware, anything that you picture your tiny house to be. Compile them all into this PowerPoint.
Great, thanks. That was a really good introduction to this activity. And I think it also shows, it hit on some points that we've been talking about kind of over and over. The one being that we're always working together, right? I like that diagram they had where they were showing how I think a lot of us jump to a conclusion with interior designer based on what we've seen on some of the network shows that we mentioned. But it really is a critical piece in the kind of overall design of the project. It's not just finishes, it is space planning, all these other things. Aria, did you want to add anything to that since it is your field?
Okay, well, rather than, I think there were some questions on the side that I can just like sort of answer out loud to in case there were any resulting questions, but one of them was about would it be very challenging or expensive to source exact materials and fixtures? So the cool thing about it is that with all these new programs and products and materials, a lot of the representatives who represent these products will actually help us to source whatever we need. And then as far as expense, there's a lot of different ranges of materials. As you saw in that huge library, it's we literally have everything from flooring materials, whatever you might put on a wall covering paint, any type of, outstanding material like cork or something like that that you won't see in every project. But it's just there and available for us to be able to use in these projects, which is really cool. And I know there's similar types of libraries for architectural components as well. But yeah, I don't know if there were any other questions, but it's really fun. And even more than that, there's a lot of responsibility to it, of course. Like I think was mentioned in the meeting details again, there's a responsibility to the codes as well, just as, architects have to deal with. And so, yeah, I don't know if there was anything else.
And I think another kind of in conjunction with that question about sourcing the materials, there's also a difference when we're looking at private work versus public work. So like that project, they showed the example of like the tech firm lobby, like they can say exactly what they want to use and the contractor can go out and buy that. If we're talking about public work like a school, I think interior design honestly gets even more challenging then because you have to find multiple on public projects. You have to provide the contractor with different options so that they can price them all out. So I don't know, Aria, if you have any experience with public work and you can kind of comment on that as well.
Honestly, I've had little experience with public work, but I have, since I started with LS3P, I've had a little bit more. And it is a matter of you sort of have to open up a bid to a whole bunch of different, I guess, companies so that they can, be able to have a chance to work on a public project. So it is different than I think a private, even like residential or commercial or any of those things. So yeah, it is more challenging. I would say you definitely have more constraints, and that can be the fun and the hard part of being an interior designer.
Yeah, I think on public projects you're required to pick 3 equals, and it's very difficult to have 3 equals when you're talking about carpet when the design is pretty much different across the board. So I guess 3 similar tones, and so that way these companies that manufacture these carpets and other materials have a opportunity to win a job and be part of that project. And the other thing about sourcing materials, I think it's also important to understand like not just the look of the material, but where these materials come from, if they're sustainable. For example, if you specify marble, where is this marble coming from? Is it coming from Italy? It's going to be very expensive on one end, but also think about all the carbon footprint that it's going to create by shipping this heavy material to the States. So there's a lot of other things that go into selecting materials, not just the way it looks.
Can anyone think of any other kind of factors of a material that you'd want to consider when you're choosing one, both interior and exterior? We've got, I think we've already established, like color, pattern, sustainability, durability. That's actually what was on my mind when I came up with that question, Anthony. So you must be a good mind reader, or we're on the same page. So that's an excellent point. I think about, like I'm working on a middle school project right now. And obviously we want to choose durable projects for that school because kids aren't kind to building materials. Something that fits with the local environment. Yep, that's a good one too. Accessibility. So when we think about floor finishes, that's one thing that comes to mind with accessibility. I don't know if, Michael, you had anything else. The mood of the project, Grace. yeah, that goes along with how we've talked about thinking about the big ideas. So I think someone else also, it might have been you, Gracie, thinking about how the interior and the exterior work together. You know, we want to be able to think of this as one complete project. So when LS3P did talk about how the interior designer is working very closely with the architect, also the engineers, you know, they want to work with the electrical engineer choosing light fixtures. You know, that's one little piece too when it's really thinking about, I think light fixtures are probably one of the bigger ones with interior design and engineering to contribute to the mood. So indoor air quality, that goes ahead and that does fit into sustainability, like low VOC. Have you all heard that term before? I think we probably covered it in the sustainability talk. But thinking about the materials we're using, where it's coming from, lead time. So Anna, do you want to explain what lead time is to the group? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh, sorry. How about that? Am I on?
Yep, we got you.
Okay,
Yep,
great.
yep.
Sorry, I was talking on mute. Yeah, lead time is really important because probably up there with cost and look and performance. So when you have a certain project schedule, I mean, some projects could have like 3 months of construction, whereas other projects are years long of construction. So the contractor has time on those longer projects to source the materials and get them to the site. And when you're on quicker projects, they need to be able to order everything at the beginning and have it on site so it doesn't delay the schedule. So when you're looking for products, it's really important to understand if those products are stocked, or if they're coming overseas, and whether they're actually going to be able to be used on the project in time.
Somebody mentioned VOCs. So, I mean, for like an example, everyday example is if you go to a hardware store and buy paint, a lot of the paints now on the label, it says low VOCs. And really what that is just the amount of off-gassing, like the smells that come from paints and other materials that have these VOCs or volatile organic compounds. Somebody explained that. And the more of that you have, the less the air quality is not as good, and it leads to kind of health problems down the road. So a lot of the materials now, the more modern materials, try to minimize the amount of the VOCs content in the material itself.
Bob also had a good question about cost and how you manage that through the process. And when you're selecting materials, the manufacturers and representatives of the different products are transparent with you when you're ordering them. So you ask those questions of them, and as you gain more experience, you understand kind of the scale of what's considered inexpensive versus expensive based on the material that you're using, and that takes time. But it's definitely part of your responsibility to ask how much that material costs and be able to see where that plugs into the greater project budget.
So on top of the cost, I think a lot of AEC companies have to consider what's called a life cycle cost. Basically what the material costs upfront to buy, but also how much it's going to cost to maintain that product. So obviously, you know, the initial cost is a big factor, but you got to also think about, you know, do I like the way it looks? How durable is it? Do I have to replace it every 3 or 4 years, or do I need to replace it every 20 years? So a lot of these factors you have to take into account before you select a material.
And I'm going to harp on that team aspect again. You know, you're depending on the type, how the project is structured, you might be working with the contractor early on and they'll be providing estimates. So they can kind of help guide that as well when we're talking some of the really big ticket items. You know, a project I was involved with, an office building in Raleigh early on during design. So the design drawings weren't even complete yet. And this isn't interiors, I'm venturing into architecture for this example. But we gave an estimate of how much the exterior skin of the building would cost. So that's what we're talking about, like what's on the outside. In this case, it was metal panel and glass. And we said that if you shrunk each floor by 4 inches, you could save so many feet and save X amount of dollars, which was a very large amount of dollars on the project by taking 4 inches off each floor. So the owner chose to proceed with that. Well, the kind of impact of that was with a lower floor, you have, and you want the same ceiling height, you've got less room to put all the stuff inside that we're actually going to talk about, after we get back from the holiday break. So when you think about everything that's above the ceiling, it took us more time to fit all that stuff, to coordinate all those systems, kind of like what we talked about last week above the ceiling, but we saved money overall because we reduced the amount of metal panel we had to use on the building. So there's all sorts of kind of factors that go into when we're considering cost. And that's why I've got a whole exercise on cost estimating coming up too, I think in February. So that's something, there is no budget for your mobile live work studio because this should be fun, and don't worry about that real world constraint until you get into the real world. Have fun for now. But it is something to kind of keep in the back of your head, that in our work, we are, except for a select few projects, generally speaking, cost is always one of the biggest factors.
Mm-hmm. I guess you also, if you think about the projects that we're working on, it is a tiny home. So most people that, create tiny homes or are able to build one will certainly think about costs, because if they're able to do anything, they would probably build a bigger home. So I think on that respect, I would consider the materials that you select when we do the cost estimate, because in reality, tiny homes are there to save whoever's doing it money, right? They're living a more frugal lifestyle, and so the building that they live in is probably also going to be very frugal.
But I think it also gives the option to really, and I think, interior designers on the call here would also comment on how you can highlight a space. Like, we're saving a bunch of money over here, so in this place we can use this really cool, whatever, light fixture, like some specialty finish in like the entry. Would you all agree on that?
Mm-hmm.
So that's also something to consider as we think about this, where you can really highlight stuff.
And I guess we also talked, we talked specifically about maybe selecting new materials, but another option is to definitely reuse materials. Maybe from an old floor you want to reuse, so that you don't have to spend the money to buy new things, but also there's some character involved with some older material, because you can't buy that really sometimes. So being able to reuse materials like from old barns, that's sometimes very popular right now. So think about that as well, not just new materials.
Points. Do we have any other questions from you all? And feel free, if you students that are on the call, to show yourselves on camera and ask a question out loud. Don't be afraid, or you can also just continue typing them in the chat. That works too.
So I go to Home Depot every now and then, and I've had a few carpentry projects that I've been doing, just like benches and shelves and stuff. And like the lumber prices, it's like double for so many of the things that I've done in the past. Like, we were just fixing a piece of baseboard. The exact same stuff used to be like 70 cents a foot. Now it's like $2.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh,
I was just gonna say,
yeah. Lumber prices have gone up like 40% in the last 6 months. Steel prices have gone up. Steel and sheet metal prices have gone up about 40%. It's a big impact. And when you're pricing your stuff, I'd go to Home Depot and I'd look at what a window costs, and I'd look at what a door costs, and look at what studs cost. It's a huge impact. And what you'll find is if you're a builder, or if you're doing this and you give somebody a price to say you were going to do a deck for somebody, and you said, hey, I'll do that deck for you for $1,500. and you sign a contract with them, and the next week lumber goes up 50%, and all of a sudden you're writing a check for $500 to build that deck for that guy for $1,500. You know, it's a real crapshoot right now the way prices are going up. So that's the art of construction and design.
I think the prices are dependent on the market. You know, like one thing that you guys can definitely know about is, you know, oil prices. When you go to the gas station, that price typically fluctuates. I know right now it's pretty low. So anything that is based around oil is going to be a lower cost at this point, because each barrel of oil that the world produces is less money. So you can apply that same concept to other materials like steel and wood. It's all supply and demand.
And so that's why there are people that is all they do is estimate.
That's the best job in the world, though.
That's what Reed does. Just in case.
Had to guess. But you know, one thing you should be thinking about, like for your thing that you want to drive down the road, is how much it weighs. So not only, you know, you might not want to put granite countertops in something you're going to drive down the road, but you could. But you know, you might just consider a little bit. You're not going to know the science of it, but you know, you're not going to put like the beam structure that I have behind me. You're probably not going to put that in a house that you drive down the road because it's going to be too heavy. So you're going to want to have light materials that give the functionality that you're looking for.
Yeah, all good points. And there are times over the course of a project, because, you know, as I can't remember if it was Aria or Anna said about, you know, the projects that last years, there might be something that even over the course of just the design portion of it, that the cost might go up. So you kind of have to rework what you're doing. So it's a kind of a constant check with people who know what's going on. That's one of the big, you know, like I said, that's why people like Reed, that's all they do. It's a big part of the industry.
Michael had a comment on where do students source images? Are there a good way to find images? On the activity itself, there's a few links to materials. And also the lady on the video mentioned that, you know, going to Pinterest is an option. So, you know, just Google what you need and a lot of the images will be there available to download. So.
And if you rewatch the video, just gonna share this real quick. So if we think about the video here, I'm not going to play it, but just to show this example. So for example, they've got Armstrong, you know, Wolf Gordon for wall coverings here, Dow tile for floor tiles. So you can also, oh, there, Anna posted a link. Perfect. So you can also check out that link, you know, think about different manufacturers. They have huge, you know, online catalogs, since we all don't have a interior design library in our homes. Check those out for some examples. So your activity is very similar to what they showed in the presentation that we're looking at here. This is what you're going to be putting together. Just an image of what all of these different materials are going to look like together.
Yeah, the PowerPoint itself has those, I guess it's a template where you can just click on the box and then you just find the file that you want to insert. Right now it's just a basic template with many of the standard items like wall, ceiling, counter. If there's things that aren't on the template, you can add it yourself with your own labels.
And I would focus too on the ones that you think are most important to your design based on, you know, what we've talked about. Think big picture too. You know, let's not forget that part. I know a lot of you posted, you know, one of the first activities we had was some precedent images. So kind of go back to those and look and see what materials most of you have already done some of this work. Go back and look and see what images you originally posted and how those might fit into actual products.
If you want physical samples, you could also get those at like Home Depot and Lowe's. That, you know, they usually have some in their carpet section and tile section. You can take samples of them.
And Nithya has a good question that I do not have an answer to. So I'm going to see if any of the other mentors on the call has any suggestions of websites that help with color and material palettes.
As far as palettes, I mean, there's like the painting websites like Sherwin-Williams or I think Behr and things like that. Like they have programs where they sort of made a palette for you of similar colors or colors that work together. So I think that's what I do when I come at colors and things like that. As far as modeling and designing the interior, I've really just mostly done SketchUp. I know that there are some programs that like you could literally like research online that, you know, say, you know, free 3D, you know, modeling and things like that. And they'll literally just, you know, you can pop in some walls and, you know, little furniture pieces that are already pre-made, and those are pretty easy. But I can't think off the top of my head the names of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You all are good Google searchers. Good point by Michael. Those precedent images can help.
Yeah, and then SketchUp is a good one to start with. It is free, and then you have the ability to actually utilize some of these materials that you find as a texture and apply them to your SketchUp model. So that's definitely an option.
You know, to kind of tie into what we talked about last week, you know, last week we were talking about all the different technologies that's out there in AEC. So we're, you know, when we look here at renderings, you know, that's kind of another, when someone posted before that they didn't realize, you know, quite the extent of the interior design field. So thinking about visualization, you know, the last architecture firm I worked with, our interior designers did a lot of renderings, both still images and video walkthroughs. So that's a whole nother piece of it too, where we can really, I think when we talk about communicating with the owner, which in our case, you think about how you as a student are communicating with your mentor, images make a really big difference. I'm not expecting any of you to go out and do a photorealistic rendering. That is not even, you know, really one of my strengths. But just getting visuals together is a really powerful way to communicate, especially in our industry that's focused on aesthetics. So Anthony, your comment that pop-out looks like a pain to build. So that's another way that, you know, when I think they talked about in the video, you know, interior designers are working through details. See, look, timed that perfectly with Aria's response. So interior designers are working on, you know, I think in here she had some, so in here when we have this example of a construction detail, so we can provide those details to the contractor so they know what we had in mind. And we might even work with, you know, an interior designer might work, especially if it's a construction manager project, you know, work with the contractor, say, okay, how can we really get this built to look this way? Mm-hmm. As far as programs, what all are you using over at LS3P? I think you said Lumion, Enscape,
Twinmotion.
Twinmotion.
And those are all like plugins or separate software that tie directly to either SketchUp or Revit. Mm-hmm. And one of the fun ones is Twinmotion. If anyone is familiar with Epic Games or the Unreal Engine, it's the same company. So whatever research they do in creating realistic video games or movie scenes, it's the same technology that we use to create realistic renderings or images for clients to preview a space, pretty much as real as possible.
So you were talking about working with a contractor to help build projects. We're doing some modular wall systems in California, and we're buying panels from AES and a bunch of different folks, and we're self-performing the work. And we're sending 2 of our carpenters out to California from Raleigh to build some rooms and build some facilities so they know how to do that when they get back. So when we're here in our local market, we can work with architects, with the carpenters and the foremen, to tell you exactly how to build it, and this is here's the details you need to put in here to make it work right.
Yeah, and going back to Anthony's question about that detail might be painful to build. It depends on how often they encounter it. So I think a lot of subcontractors, that's probably a very typical detail that they find on a lot of projects. So when they look at it, they probably already know how to do it. I think the other example with kind of that half sphere shape, that's going to take more effort for a subcontractor to figure out. But that's why the detail is there to help them out.
If anybody's ever seen the Apple headquarters building, the Oculus, that's a round building that we built that had a lot of details to work out.
And Reed works with DPR Construction, for any of you out there that are curious. In terms of Bob's question here for mock-ups, I know we work on exterior mock-ups quite a bit. I don't know that any mentors out there encountered any interior mock-ups. So what we mean by mock-up is we actually build a small, for any of you that were out at the field trip we did last year, and if you don't remember this, it is perfectly okay. We walked past our exterior mock-up where it was a big wall just kind of in the middle of the parking lot, but it showed how the brick, transitioned to metal panel and how the windows fit in. So we're showing how all these different systems are actually going to be installed on the building. We can also sometimes do it in that way. The designer and owner can review it before we do the rest of the work. Sometimes we can also do mock-ups in place where we do it, in the actual work, and then the owner can review it before we proceed with the rest.
Yeah,
we're doing a hotel down in Charlotte right now, and we're building a room in our office. And the room has the bed, the dressers, the sink. It's a full room, and every detail, all the pictures, every outlet is all in that room. And interior designers go through and say, "Nah, we want it over here. Or we don't like that color. We'll move it this way or do it that way." So the owners and the designers can all see it before it goes in place.
I think like full mock-ups for interiors is more common for spaces like hotels or multi-family buildings where you'll have multiple of the same same room.
Yeah.
But I will say that's what our boards and things are for. A lot more times we're sending clients just the materials and not necessarily on a board for them to look at and sort of compare and everything like that. But that's really where our mock-up comes in, is with the materials, sending the materials or making the boards like we're doing here, or doing the 3D models and things like that, so they can see how that will all look together digitally.
Yeah, we'll actually use mock-ups quite a bit with when a client is investing in, let's say, like a millwork piece that might be specialty, or like that seat that you all saw in the photo. You want to make sure you get the details right before you build it at full scale. So a lot of times in our drawings, we'll say, please mock up this portion of this installation so that we can see maybe a lighting effect and make sure that it's what we really want in the end product, or some joinery details. And usually it's just when the contractor is doing something special and kind of out of the ordinary, and you want to make sure that it's done the way that everybody intends it to before it's done at a full scale.
Yeah, it's a lot cheaper to spend that money up front to get it right, because we're talking about hotel rooms, hospitals that have thousands of rooms.
So yeah, they're going to mock those up for sure.
Yeah, you don't want to build 1,000 rooms with the wrong detail.
Yeah.
So the people that look at the mock-ups are the nurses. If it's a hospital room, it's going to be a nurse that's going to go in there and they're going to say, "How do you like this?" Well, when I go over the bed and I got to get oxygen, I want to be able to grab it from here, not from there. And let's move that nozzle this way and move that nozzle this way. And also the maintenance guys, if they got to fix a faucet or fix a light or get to something, shut off valve. They want to know they have access to everything. So a lot of people go through those mock-ups to make sure it all works out.
At a previous architecture firm I worked at where we did some healthcare work, I don't remember what particular space we were renovating, but we actually took a floor in an empty parking garage, or I guess what we would call down here parking deck, and did a mock-up. I want to say we even just put out paper on the floor of like how the new nurses station was going to be laid out so that they could kind of walk through, and kind of like what Reed was just saying, you know. So here we're not thinking so much about color and detail and material, but just the physical space of how they get from, you know, the nurses station over, do they have line of sight to where they need it? So these are all things that we can do physically. We can also do virtually. I think that's where things kind of are moving. There's still something to be said for the physical part, but we can look more into options. I don't think there's any perfect solutions out there right now, but obviously technology is always changing for how we use virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, in terms of sharing all these concepts with the owners. Because obviously we can do the visualizations, you know, we saw that in these examples here from LS3P, but how do we get people, you know, physically into that space? So it's pretty cool if you look at some of those examples too.
If you look up it's called the Dive at Duke University Design, and it's a room you go in, and it's a virtual room, and you stand in there, and it's a 3D model of the room you're in, and you can see up, down, across, and it's all in 3D, and so you can look down under your building, up above it. They use it for yachts a lot. So a yacht broker will come in and put, you know, you're building a $3 million yacht, and they sit the yacht owner in that boat and say, okay, this is what it's going to look like when you pull up to the pier. And they'll go, oh, geez, I can't see the pier from here. Maybe we move the side in or out. And it's pretty amazing what they do with that stuff.
Interesting.
It's kind of the more expensive something is, the more likely you're going to get a mock-up. So custom furniture, custom finishes on casework and kitchens and such. You're always going to check those.
And I've even done, you know, when we think what Reed was just talking about, you know, we think is like up here, I've done just even Google Cardboard. You know, this was several years ago, but really like kind of low hanging fruit with that, just to kind of get a better idea of space. So like I said, I don't think the technology is quite there yet. I still think it's a little, I would say, gimmicky in terms of how we use it in design and construction, but I think it is coming. So be on the lookout.
And I'm sure you guys are all familiar with all those virtual reality headsets, and architecture and construction and engineering firms are all utilizing that as well, with the headset plus the controls, and they can interact with the space. Like, you know, we talked about, you know, where's the faucet and how tall is the counter. So all that stuff is happening in the virtual world as well. But again, it kind of goes back to, you know, why do people still draw? Why do people still like walking in physical space? Is sometimes you can't replace that with virtual things.
And I don't know if you all picked up on during the presentation when they talked about they're still doing hand sketching. I think that was actually a question that someone had last week. So yes, we've got all sorts of computer programs we can use to draw things in the computer, but we are still doing sketching, especially when you think early on design, even throughout design. So sketching is still a good skill to have. Any of you going into architecture school will be doing hand drawing.
Yeah, so we use a lot of tools, like, yeah, pen, paper, but then we also use Oculus, Xboxes too. So it's a whole array of tools that you can use to get the same idea, but you still, drawing it still gives you this knowledge of how stuff work or how it's built almost without, so because you're constrained to the real world almost, not in the digital world, everything kind of floats.
Did you say that it brings out the artistic side of the architect?
Can you repeat that, Bob? You were a little quiet.
Yeah, I was wondering if hand drawing and sketches and all that stuff brings out the artistic aspect of design.
I'd say yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think kind of related to what we were just talking about is that some people can feel limited sometimes, especially depending on their familiarity with software, where you can draw anything and it might be super rough, but you can still get your point across that you might need to take more time to physically model in the computer, well, digitally model in the computer. So I think that's where some of that creativity still comes into play when we think about hand sketching. For some people it is easier to do digitally. Other people it's easier to do by hand. It really depends on the person, I think.
So I think there is a big place for sketching, especially in the beginning stages when you work with the client, because if you go in there with a rendering and you're already done and they hate it, that's because it's photorealistic and they feel like there's no process where they can refine it. So when you show a sketch, it's rougher, it's a little more abstract, and sometimes you can sell your ideas better through a sketch than a final photorealistic rendering.
And that sketch also might be digital. We've also done 3D view. I talked about last week just kind of doing 3D views that don't have the photorealistic, because people can get caught up on things that you don't intend at that point. So we also do kind of like what Sue was saying, but digitally. And John, did you have a comment? I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, I was just going to say that one of the things we talk about a lot using the different computer programs is trying to design in a way that the programs don't limit us, which I think someone else already mentioned. But basically what it comes down to is the different programs you draw in on the computer, you all draw in different ways. Certain ways are easier, certain ways might be harder. So it's subtly maybe influencing the way you think and do different things like that. And we try to avoid it, and we also need to try to meet our schedule. But sometimes simply just using a piece of paper real quick to plan out your idea beforehand, anything's possible on paper. There's no computer limiting factors, and it's also a great way to plan it out before you spend, an afternoon modeling something in the computer.
And sometimes the clients, when you go to a client meeting, you're not going to say, I'm going to go back, re-render this, and then that takes it's a whole nother process. So if there's a way to get them on board just with a simple sketch, and then you go back and do that work, it's going to be a little more productive.
Great. Well, I think we've had a lot of good points today talking about interior design. I hope we've given you enough information on how to proceed with the activity. You can rewatch that video and listen to the instructions at the end. It's all posted in Classroom now too. So images, this is, like I said, another really image heavy assignment. So if we kind of wrap things up here in the next few minutes, so we finish at 6, we have a small group session next week to give project feedback. So like I said, use the link that your lead mentor will provide and post updates to anything that you've worked on to this point. So, each small group I know runs things a little bit differently, but be prepared to share what you've done and any changes you've made. So since our previous, how do I want to say this? So we had a small group session on the 19th, so we'd have had 2 large group lessons since. So any changes you made since that time, go ahead and share with your small group. So we have a few more minutes for any questions, and some of us always hang on at the end here to answer any last minute questions too. But I do want to thank you all for joining us today. We're getting a lot of good participation out of y'all, and really do appreciate you taking all the time. We're seeing some really good stuff come out, some really good questions. So just post images, and if you do have any questions for this assignment, please feel free to reach out to your lead mentor. Anthony's question for the 3D drawing assignment, pencil or digitally, you can do it either way, whichever way you're more comfortable with. Like John was just describing, there's advantages to both, disadvantages to both as well. And I would recommend that you all get any updates you've made posted by, I would say, next Tuesday night. That way your mentors have Wednesday to review it before we meet on Thursday. So we're not giving any set deadlines, because once again, this isn't homework. So just get it turned in with enough time for your mentors to be able to review it. Does that answer your question, Anthony? Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us. And like I said, we're going to hang on here. So if anyone does have any questions, go ahead and just either unmute yourself and ask or just post in the chat.